This Development Finance Today roundtable will discuss the rise of purpose-built student accommodation in the development sector. We are joined by legal, lender, broker and developer experts in this particular market to explore what key challenges developers should be aware of in the PBSA market and how all parties in the transaction chain can help mitigate and resolve them, and whether the accessibility of finance has changed over the past few years for this type of scheme. Simon Knowles, Head of Property Development at Aldermore, will be joined by Ranjiv Kumar, Partner at Watson Farley & Williams. Also in attendance, Chris Whitney at Ennis, Tarek Juma at Future Generation and Anthony Leville at Volume Property. Simon, why do you think this market in general has become so popular?
Two big reasons. One is the obvious one. There's more people going to university than there ever has been before. The ongoing education side. So there's obviously more numbers, more demand. Two, also there's the older stock that's been there at all the university cities, towns around the country. I think gone are the days as well of from my generation, anyway, the young ones, where it was just basically 5 blokes in a house and it was trashed and all that type of thing. Demands from students now are, it's technology, it's the facilities, it's shared facilities such as a gym and things like that. They're very, very keen to have that lifestyle that actually is conducive to end result.
As an asset class, PBSA has become much more mature now than it was, say, 10 years ago. So that means that we've got these huge portfolios that are trading at great returns for institutions, for investors, and therefore more and more developers are actually getting into PBSA, diversifying maybe from standard resi or hotels into student accommodation, and therefore there's more coming in the pipeline to try and bridge the gap because of the amount of students that still require access to these beds. But I think because of the demands of the modern student, as it were, in terms of the amenity spaces, the provision, the shared areas, the well-being of the whole living experience, new build developments are probably more in demand.
The typical student is so different now. I mean, I read a statistic that something like 36% of students don't drink alcohol anymore. Perhaps it's things like increasing tuition fees that's making students focus on this and realising how important it is.
Is that because 64% of students don't actually fill in surveys?
There's a massive benefit operationally to have a large number of occupants in a building that you can manage, provide amenities for. Ideally, you should be providing a great student experience as well. So there's not many opportunities whereby you can, look, if we compared it to a bunch of HMOs, a purpose-built student accommodation block can house, say, 200 students, whereas that would be spread across 40 HMOs potentially.
Are there cost savings because it's all in one place rather than having HMOs scattered around?
In terms of staff costs, at least, you're not running around trying to deal with 40 separate boilers, 40 different roofs,
Sure.
Bunch of different bathrooms leaking. At least it's contained in the building. You may have on-site maintenance team that can deal with the issues. So operationally, again, it's set up now in a way where you can quite comfortably plug in additional assets into your portfolio whilst using your existing teams.
Just on the HMO point as well, it's an important one because planning authorities are taking a sympathetic view to planning applications for PBSA schemes. Right. Essentially, in some areas, what they want to do is to have students move out of the city centre, essentially. People, places like Oxford, maybe in Plymouth, Portsmouth, places like that, and into purpose-built schemes to free up the HMOs for those other people that may need them. It's
an argument we use a lot in our planning applications. So, typically 3 student beds equate to 1 dwelling. So if you do a 300-bed PBSA, then in effect you're releasing 100 dwellings back to the general market.
So you're seeing more lenders offering this type of finance?
Yeah, I think at the moment, from my perspective, I don't think the market's been any more liquid for this type of asset class than it is at the moment. All the institutions are very keen to fund it, but it goes beyond that. We have a lot of family offices that are keen to fund it, both UK and overseas, and even large contractors. Contractors, we have funded quite large schemes with contractors putting in equity, not actually to get the build contract necessarily, but with a view to actually moving it into their investment side of things at practical completion.
The driver from a funder's point of view is it's because the demand is there and we know that a completed unit is likely to be fully stocked or housed, that's great, because then the funder's got the comfort that the investment side of it, whether the developer decides to retain it or sell it or partial, whatever they want to do with it, that actually it works after that.
What is the trend? Are more developers keeping it or selling it?
More and more now. I think historically we've seen that PBSA or student development has been via investors, traditional investors who have come into the development market. Okay. Now we're seeing developers actually going into what was historically an investment market.
And the fact that so many lenders are keen to be a part of this marketplace does mean that there's increasing flexibility in terms of gearing and also pushing cost of funds down as well.
It's definitely a lot more competitive in terms of the access to finance at the moment, but for me, it's also very important to remember that it's not just the pricing. You know, you need to work with someone who understands the asset class, the nuances, and who will stand by you, because when you're a developer, you will always be coming up against challenges. You know, if it was too easy, it wouldn't be as profitable.
If the transaction is a bit more complex and you need the mezz and or stretch senior or some other finance products, then it makes sense to use a broker for sure. And in particular, if that broker's got access to other sources of funding outside of the traditional banks, then that's especially useful. So if you've got access to private equity or family offices, then perfect, because that's not ordinarily accessible. You just wouldn't know. And also, some funders will only work with you if you go through a broker anyways.
It's key from a supply point of view, understanding actually in certain locations there's a lot of supply of PBSA at the more luxury end, but perhaps not at the lower end, where actually that is the demand.
With build costs going up, we are seeing more and more developers using off-site modular construction, whether that it might be on one scheme just a bathroom pod going in, all the way through to a finished off-site construction apartment.
We haven't done it yet. We've done some studies on it. I think it is something that will be more and more common. Probably once funders are comfortable with it, that's when people will start doing it.
It's the growing side of the industry without a shadow of a doubt.
We worked on a scheme recently, and once the ground slab had been laid, the rest of it was very easy to put up. In fact, it was just very, very quick. It was a modular development. We managed to get the development programme adhered to, PC'd on when it was supposed to, and then obviously the students were in. And that's the thing about PBSA developments, is that, and it sounds very obvious, but if you don't hit that September market, then you're going to have to wait until the next academic year to actually bring people in. Equally, if you promise accommodation and don't deliver it, you're going to have to put up students in hotels and so on.
However long it takes to build, how do you know that the students are still going to want those same things there?
You just got to talk to your customers. It's like if you're running a bar, you speak to your customers, you know what they like and what they don't like, and it's the same. And the bigger a pool of customers you have, students living in your developments, the more you can understand.
That ongoing feedback and research behind it is absolutely vital, because, like you say, 5 years' time, it will be changed. It won't be as it is today. The demand will be there for living accommodation, but what goes into that living accommodation, the style of it, is bound to be different from what it is today.
So what happens to the existing schemes?
Ideally, if you've got schemes where you've got spaces that are pretty flexible, so you can change them from just a breakout area maybe into a study area, then that can help massively.
If you've got people who go in, you've got a new build, and you're stuck with all first-year university students. They're very different people by the time if they stay in that same place for 3 years, they're very different people by the time they come in, with probably very different demands. So that's quite an interesting sort of way to look at how do you cater for the sort of ongoing, what you'd hope, a bit more maturity towards the back end.
The
really.
Workload changes as well. Normally it increases each year as well. So do they have enough time to relax around the kitchen or be in a cinema room?
So do the first year do they need as many study areas for the first year students? Yeah. Or do you need an extra bar for the first year students? So
I think it partly makes the sector quite exciting to be a part of, because developers aren't, because demand is always changing, developers aren't just having to meet the bar as of now. They're looking beyond that and trying to produce something a bit more innovative. Yeah. We start to see these sort of hybrid co-living schemes from people like the Collective, which I think we'll see more of that type of thing as well.